podcast of Ascends at Boston Avenue and Committing Faith in Public. As a part of Ascends, my name is Philip Boone, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
Also part of the Ascends team, I'm Caitlin Drake, and I use female pronouns she, her, hers.
And I'm Gary Peluso-Verdend. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Religion and Public Life at Phillips Theological Seminary. I use male pronouns of he, him, his, and I'm a proud attendee at Boston Avenue. I need to disclose that.
Before we begin, I'd like to state that the views represented in this podcast are those of the individuals in this conversation and not the official position of Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. We are recording this podcast remotely from our individual homes during the COVID-19 pandemic, as we practice physical distancing as a church community.
Today, our conversation is around faith-based organizations receiving PPP, Payroll Protection Program, funding through the CARES Act during this ongoing pandemic. Boston Avenue UMC was one of the many thousands of recipients, including over 100 faith-based organizations in Oklahoma. Our guests are some of our key leadership at Boston Avenue UMC, Senior Pastor Reverend David Wiggs, Executive Director and General Counsel Angela Dale, and Director of Financial Services Ann Nelson. Welcome all.
Great to be here. Great to be here.
So just to start, Gary, can you tell us a little bit about some of your concerns that we saw that helped prompt this conversation?
Happy to. So I follow church, state, and religion and culture issues. And when the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, was first being discussed in Congress, I was reading the rightwingwatch.org site and saw that Senator Marco Rubio had been delegated to go over to a group of, to communicate with a group of President Trump's evangelical supporters that for sure you're going to be included in this funding package. Now for me and where I stand in regard to Christian nationalism and this particular administration in Washington, that raised my alarm bells some. So then I saw that the program had been approved and that many faith-based nonprofits were applying. Now, this program was unusual, not just because of its offering to faith-based nonprofits. The Small Business Administration has not previously offered such a program to other than for-profit businesses. So nonprofits in general being included, this is a new thing. And then the issue of faith-based nonprofits being included was part of that newness. And again, I was somewhat concerned because of the way it was first set up for me in the Right Wing Watch website. So as I looked at this, my concerns are one, always, what does that wall of separation of church and state look like today? It's pretty Swiss cheesed. And the Supreme Court has recently done some things to rule in ways that exempt faith-based organizations from, let's say, some non-discrimination laws and the like. So all those were major concerns for me. And I just I'm like an old school Baptist. I'm a United Methodist, always have been. But I'm an old school Baptist in this way. I'm really wary of the intersections of church and state, especially when, and this is again what was so unusual about this particular program. This is the first time that I'm aware of, and certainly in the post-World War II era, if not since at least the 19th century or maybe even the 18th century in some ways, where government funding or taxpayer funding, in fact, is going in part, not in whole, but in part to pay the salaries of the clergy themselves. So anyways, I wrote all this up, put it in a blog after seeing that 100 or so faith-based organizations in Oklahoma that have received funds. I mean, up to the $5 to $10 million range for the Life Church and the like, and then I put it out there on, published the blog on the seminary's website, and the initial responses I got back were church are greedy, You should give the money back, and the like, despite the fact that I had talked about the social utility of many congregations, that these were going to pay salaries of people, not just clergy people, but church school teachers and I should say religious school teachers or daycare teachers or funding for homeless ministries and other kinds of things. That for those who were already biased against churches getting any kind of government funding, they didn't hear any of that. All they saw was government gave churches money. So I thought, especially when I saw that the Small Business Administration was very reticent to release any names on this, and I thought, okay, so have the recipient organizations talked about why they applied, what money they got, and what they're using it for? And I thought, at least from the point of view of the receiving organizations, I'd love to see some transparency here. So that's why I've raised a bit of a ruckus about this. David, can you, it might be helpful for the audience to hear, what prompted Boston Avenue to apply for the PPP funding? Kind of what was your situation at the time that you all applied, and say something, if you could, about what the internal discussion was about all that.
Sure. I'd like to say that, at a church, we're focused on people in the congregation and people we serve in the community. And it's great to have somebody like you, Gary, who are watching the goings on of church and state from a different perspective. We believe, as you do, in the separation of church and state, and that we're not going to be involved in partisan politics and that kind of thing. The United Methodist Church has believed in that. That's part of their social principles. And so I think there are some great differences among the religious organizations that receive the money and how the money will be used. In terms of our own conversation around that, of course, the virus was breaking out. The spread had begun. The estimations of the numbers of people that could be infected and become ill or die were pretty grave. This is the second week of March that I'm talking about. I bring it to our staff meeting and say, I think we need to look at this. Having a large congregation with hundreds of people gathering together in a single room for an hour, or in our building for 2 or 3 hours on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night kind of situation, looked like to me that we were getting ready to be part of the problem. And we really wanted to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So we closed the building, which meant no in-person worship. And so Angie and Ann can add more to the detail of that. But of course, what happened is people not coming to worship, where often they make a financial gift to support the mission and ministry of the church. That all changed pretty quickly and pretty dramatically. So when we began to look at how do we continue to employ people, and then the loan program became available, it was certainly something we wanted to consider. But let me toss it to Angie to say more about where we were financially and the number of employees we were looking at trying to continue employing, that kind of thing.
As David indicated, to understand why we made the decision, you have to go back in time to March 13th when we did something unprecedented. We closed the church. Never been done in the more than 100-year history of the church. At the time we did that, we had 35 faces looking at us saying, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my income? Am I going to lose my health insurance? Of those 35, 5 were clergy, and the remainder are clerical, department heads, custodians. I mean, people, all of us were not set up financially to have the health insurance and the salaries just go away. In addition to that, we have 18 teachers in our what we call Boston Avenue Weekday School, which is our preschool. And we desperately wanted to be able to keep everyone employed and to alleviate the concern, the fears, and the loss of both income and health insurance, because at that time, For all we knew, loss of health insurance could be a death sentence to someone. At the end of March, when we looked at where we stood financially, our giving, our donations was down 53%. Trust me, that is a number that reverberates in your brain as you try to sleep. If we're down 53% after 2 weeks of closure, where are we going? How long will this last? Can we sustain it? Ann and I had carefully read the PPP language to determine whether or not we qualified. We kept candidly looking for that phrase that says, but not faith-based institutions, and didn't find it. It wasn't there. So we made the decision that in order to be able to apply, to be able to get that money to keep our people safe and employed, that we would file an application. The application process opened at midnight on April 3rd. Ours was filed by Ann, who had worked with Herculean efforts at 12:07. So we weren't messing around. That was on a Friday night. We were notified on Tuesday that we were approved for the program and that we would be getting 2.5 months worth of what our salary and benefits were for all of those people. And so we were able to tell everyone, we can keep you employed no matter what's happening with the donations to the church through at least June 19th. And to be able to give them that confidence and assurance was tremendous.
Yeah, I was going to ask, just on an emotional level, what was it like to deliver that news, and how was that news received?
I can't even begin to tell you how it felt to have all of these terrified people looking at you for leadership and whether or not you're going to end their paycheck, and to be able to tell them you will have health coverage, you will have your regular salary between now and June the 19th. It was a profound moment that enabled them to feel comforted and go home and tell their families that they were not going to be cut off from their church work. And I remain very grateful that we were able to do that, and very proud of the fact that we have kept everyone employed, including all of our preschool teachers, despite the fact that we didn't have tuition coming in to cover those expenses.
And just chiming in, this is Caitlin, as one of those employees, we had to do something. I think it's a term that I think everybody is getting sick of, but we had to pivot really quickly with all of our ministries and all of our efforts. And to be able to do that without the threat of, will my job be here next week? We were able to be a lot more innovative, a lot more compassionate, a lot more hands-on, a lot more empathetic. We were just, I think, able to make that pivot with some emotional release of, I'm not going to lose my job while I'm trying to totally reinvent everything that we had been doing. As a communications person, I had a 3-month communications plan. Turns out, had to scrap that. The next 3 months were not going to look anything like we thought they were. And so to do that, to scrap everything, start from fresh, knowing that I was not going to lose my health insurance, my job, my paycheck, especially my husband's a contract worker, so knowing whether he was going to be employed, that's scary stuff. And so to try new things while not living in fear was really incredible.
And to kind of piggyback off of what Caitlin said, as the mid-high youth director, we were already having so much heartache with things we were giving up or losing, such as all of summer camps were canceled. And that's what a lot of us live for, is the summer camps and going to Camp Egan and being able to do all the missions we do. So we were losing so much. And so having that reassurance that would still come in was a huge help during this time of heartache of everything we were losing, and so that was a big help with that as well.
Very good, thank you. And so you received money in the category of $150,000 to $1 million, I think was the category that Boston Avenue is in. So you received that money, something in that category, and then what happens with the money? What are you using it for? How has that been working for you? And maybe Ann, would you try your hand at this one?
Sure, happy to. This is Ann Nelson again with the Director of Financial Services. We did receive our loan money mid-April, and we immediately put that in a separate checking account. The funds are to be used specifically for payroll costs, and up to 70% of the loans go towards payroll costs. The remaining 30% are eligible to be used for mortgage payments, rent payments, utilities, things of that nature. We have been using our funds for payroll costs. 81% of our monies have gone directly to payroll costs. The remaining 19% we've used for utilities here at Boston Avenue.
Very good. I'm sure that working with any kind of government funding is somewhat akin to nonprofits are very familiar with fund accounting, which fundamentally means you have to follow donor intent. You have to set up funds in ways that you can track donor intent. So this money that you receive from PPP, therefore, has to be tracked separately. And speaking, though, of funding, can you say a little bit, too, about the funding of ministry at Boston Avenue? Some folks will know that Boston Avenue has an endowment for building that's spoken of often in worship and in stewardship time. It has, for people listening don't know what Boston Avenue is, it is a fabulous merger of, as a church building of Gothic and Art Deco, and is a tremendous piece of both architecture as well as an evangelistic tool still, I think, very much for the congregation. So, having an endowment to pay for those, that's absolutely great. Are there other ways that ministry, that any of this kind of interim in between the old normal, whatever the new normal is, are there any other ways this could have been funded other than the acceptance of the PPP program?
We do have endowments at Boston Avenue, as you indicated. One is set up purely through all of the necessary legalities to be used for the building, maintenance, roofing, leaks, whatever may occur with a building that's more than 100 years old. The second one is for mission, and that is set up to be used purely for mission outside the church to the community, primarily in Tulsa, also in a few other areas where we provide services and attempt to mission serve in those areas. And then finally, there's one for general ministerial costs. None of those have ever been used for payment of salary and benefits. We felt that certainly with regard to the building endowment and the mission endowment, to use those for payment of salary and benefits would be a violation of the law, which was not an area in which we were interested in going. With regard to general, it's never been done before. It's questionable whether it can be done legally, and all we really knew was it was going to be a bloodbath to determine whether or not the monies could be used that way. I still can't give you an answer on whether or not it could have been, because we fortunately didn't have to go through that bloodbath. We were able to take a route that was sure and certain.
Sure. Now, by bloodbath, you mean what?
By bloodbath, I mean various members of our financial leadership team have different opinions about that, and that we would have ended up having to go back and do the legal analysis of the way it was set up and whether or not this was something that fell within those auspices. But to be able to spend it to provide salary and benefits, I think it was very questionable whether or not that would have been approved.
Yeah, right. And like you said, back in mid-March, 53% down in terms of giving not knowing where this thing is headed, and which of course doesn't even take into consideration yet how many people at Boston Avenue would have been, who are attendees and givers, had in any way first their own income already shorted, or their job threatened by this. And so again, the long-term consequences could have been really, really significant. So one of the critiques I've heard out there, and in fact, is where some folks stated on in response to my blog, were, well, churches don't pay taxes. If they don't pay taxes, they shouldn't be able to tap a fund like this. I know that's not a really accurate statement, unless you're talking about federal and state income tax and local property taxes. But can you speak to in what ways does a nonprofit or faith-based nonprofit participate in paying taxes?
Sure, I'll take it. This is Angie. Yes, we absolutely pay payroll taxes on every employee within the church. And that's true just as we would if we were Bob's Bakery. We pay those payroll taxes, and then each of our employees pays income tax on what they receive. So taxes are paid at multiple levels by the church, by the employees. So the statement that, oh, they got all this money tax-free, it's a lovely myth, but that's exactly what it is. It's a myth.
And I think this is Caitlin chiming in.
Yes.
In Gary's structure of his question, something that I think is important, having come from the background of nonprofits that were not faith-based into a faith-based nonprofit, is that this tax kind of policy, it extends across nonprofits. So it's not
Yes.
just churches
Right.
that are exempt from sales and property taxes. It's also museums. It's the Cancer Society of America. It's all of those people out there trying to make communities better, investing in communities. And so, you know, for me, the transition from a non-faith-based nonprofit background into a church, a lot of it is kind of the same landscape, but then when you step back, we don't always understand it in our public discourse the same way. I don't think that when we talk about churches being tax exempt, we're thinking of them as a nonprofit. We're thinking of them as churches, but we are a nonprofit, just like all these other nonprofits that are doing good things too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the where the concern comes in, or at least a legitimate concern, I would, because what you just said is absolutely true. Nonprofits are nonprofits, and people are people. And nonprofits, the very few nonprofits have an expenditure which is big, which is larger than their personnel costs, because for a nonprofit, the people are the program, and all, and that is the case across the board. I think the difference is that faith component, and in you know, the government's not supposed to favor one religion over another. Not supposed to be actively promoting religion, also not supposed to be actively hindering religion. And so sometimes, you know, we on the religious side of things say, well, we have a lot of social utility too. We're teaching morals and values, and we're providing all these kinds of programs and services and the like. But again, I think the concern, you know, for at least some of the church-state separationist types would be, well, we're paying the salaries of, okay, now speaking from a liberal or progressive church point of view, you know, we're paying salaries for people who advocate the exact things that we are fighting against, in terms of, in some cases it's white supremacy, and in some cases it's denigration of LGBTQ persons, and also I think that seems to be of more concern, I would say, for the progressive side of things than the conservative side of things. And David, I don't know if you have any response or comment you'd like to make back to that.
Well, you know, the whole discussion of church and state and separation of those and what that relationship is. varies from place to place and time to time. I think the key is, at least as far as, Boston Avenue Church is concerned, the United Methodist Church, is that, we see a real difference between promoting the social good or even encouraging people to vote and participate in the electoral process over against funding candidates or having candidates speak or suggesting how our congregation members would vote. There would be a real difference in terms of how we would think about the free exercise of religion in terms of how that interfaces with politics. Clearly, we interface with governments all the time, whether it's, police on our property because there's violence happened, or the streets around us, or whatever, public water coming to our building. I mean, obviously there's relationships between governments and churches. I think it's the nature of how do we use our freedom, and are we becoming politically partisan over against being issue oriented or serving the community for the community good kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I will point out, in case, a lot of people will not take the time to dig through the Small Business Administration's website and parse out their Excel spreadsheet and get to Oklahoma and nonprofits. Some of the Jewish organizations in our community also receive funding. Some of the Muslim organizations in our community receive funding. The Unitarian Universalists receive funding. So this was a program, or has been a program, that is multiple religions have participated in, as well as colleges, a lot of private Christian colleges and the like, theological seminaries. I think each one of our United Methodist freestanding seminaries applied for and received funding. So this is quite a bit broader than just a narrowly defined Christian church funding here, which again, I'm just going to say it's different. What we're doing, this of course, having a pandemic to be able to respond to was a different circumstance, but having this sort of program available to religious nonprofits, as well as nonprofits in general, it's a different thing. Go ahead, Ann.
I think I don't speak as the Director of Financial Services here, but just as an employee. When I think about the intent of the CARES Act, it was regarding relief and economic security. So as an individual, as an employee, had we in the community not been allowed, had Boston Avenue not been allowed to take advantage of this, or any other faith-based organization not been allowed, I would feel slighted, because my economic security for my family is important as well. So I think it goes to the real core of what that program was, the CARES Act that was implemented. I think it is meant for the community and employees, and I think it goes to what it was meant to do.
Right, and I think that what you just said is really the winning argument on this. These are people, they're employees, they're impacted by an event which is beyond any of our control. At least in the outset. It should be more in control now, but that's a different topic. And so as Philip put up in a comment here, the Dr. Seuss quote from Horton Hears a Who: "People are people no matter how small, or no matter where they're employed." So I think this is actually great. All right, so one of the last things I want to ask, go ahead, Angie.
Just one thought. One of the other criticisms that I've read is, okay, these churches aced out other small businesses. There are small businesses out there that don't have the opportunity to get these same funds. I think that was true with phase one, because everybody rushed to get the phase one money. The last I read, there was still in the phase two funds that the Congress has made available, $132 billion that had not been allocated for entities that had applied. And the time period to apply has been extended to August 8th. So for any small business out there who hasn't applied yet, or who maybe applied in phase one and got turned down for some reason, I would encourage them to apply now to try to get some of that money that's still available. This never needs to be a we versus they situation. This act needs to cover all of us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And last thing I wanted to say, or ask, in fact, as we're coming to the end of our time here. So, Caitlin, you mentioned a little bit ago that the congregation, or I should say that you, the staff, really had to pivot in terms of your plans and your programs. What did that look like? What has that looked like for you all? As one who tries to reach out to various members of the religious community for various favors, record a video for this or podcast for that, I'm finding people harder to get a hold of now than even during so-called normal times. And I think that has a lot to do with how much busier, in fact, how much more time things are taking. But reflect on that a little bit as we close for the congregation. For too long, there's been, folks who think that, oh, well, church, you work for 1 hour a week, which hasn't been the case, has never been the case. But in particular now, what does work look like for you all? 1 or 2 examples, 2, 3 examples.
As far as with me and the mid-high, I actually end up seeing my youth a lot more than I used to, because during the year we'd have Wednesday night youth and then Sunday morning Sunday school and see them. So I see them those 2 times. And then throughout the week, I'm planning curriculum and figuring out what I'm going to do going forward. And what we've done this time is on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I do a devotional. So I see them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then for a 30-minute devotional or so. And then via Zoom. I'm sorry. Yeah. Thank you. Via Zoom. And then Wednesday night, we continue to do evening youth, even though we always stop for the summer because there's so much summer stuff. This year, all that stuff was canceled. So we continued to do Wednesday night DTBA is what we call it. It stands for Downtown Boston Avenue. And we continue to do that. I taught confirmation on Friday because we missed confirmation Sunday. So I just continued to teach confirmation. So I taught confirmation on Friday. And then Sunday, I did Sunday school in the afternoon via Zoom. And then in the meantime, with all that, I would be planning curriculum, be planning different activities to do. Because Wednesday night, I've learned that youth activities via Zoom, you have to be really creative and really do a lot of research to do new activities every single week. So it was a lot of working with that. And also, once we are actually able to meet in person, whenever that time may be, both Alicia and I, as the youth directors, are going to continue doing Zoom as well for those who don't feel comfortable. So we'll be combining the two when it is time. So I've felt a lot busier during this time than I usually would be, because it's trying to figure out ways to be creative and so forth.
I think part of this is Caitlin speaking, part of this transition to virtual space has been learning technology for a lot of folks. So I'm a millennial, I'm a little more of a digital native, but church as a whole is not largely in those digital spaces. You can think of some good leaders in that, or some churches that is more of their ministry model is to be virtual. But I think for the vast majority of churches, this has been a huge learning curve in terms of just technology and that shift. So I know that from a communications lens, some of my job has just been coaching the rest of our staff and our team on some of how our technology works and functions and how we can use it. So when we first moved into this, everybody had to learn Zoom, and not everybody had utilized it. We quickly got to know where our microphones and our video cameras on our screen were located, and how do you use a virtual background if we want to have fun, and how do you shoot your own video at home, and how do we adapt worship to be in those digital spaces. And I think Boston Avenue was fortunate that we were already on TV and recording our services, so we didn't have to make that shift quite as much as some other churches who had never been in that space before. But we certainly still had to figure out, okay, our choir can't get together to sing. How do we provide music? What does that look like? And so that was a little bit of, lay leadership and tech team working on that, but also our music director having to make those decisions and figure all of that out. We had to figure out who in our community is hurting and how do we care for them. So I am not a minister. I did not go to seminary, but thinking about, okay, the people that their main point of contact, thinking about my grandmother, whose main point of contact with her community was her church. If she's isolated alone at home, how do we reach out? So we started our Boston Avenue Buddies program for a letter writing program, rethinking what our newsletter looks like, because it's no longer just reporting who said and did what or what activities are coming up. It's really a lifeline. We started a daily devotional, so that was available online, but one of our ministers is sending that out to our homebound folks. So just really thinking about the spaces that people were hurting and how we needed to move in to fill that was a huge part of that pivot as well. And again, I'm not a minister, but I know that in March, when we were looking at the death tolls coming out of other countries, our ministers were girding their loins for funerals and for community grief in a way that we haven't seen before. And so when I think back to March and I think back to this PPP passing and people even being critical of paying minister salaries and thinking about the grief that ministers were feeling on behalf of their communities that they serve, kind of anticipatory grief, I wouldn't want them to have that axe over their head either, of trying to do grief and worry about their position. So there was a lot going on. There's still a lot going on. And, for folks who want to connect with some of our digital ministry, come find us in virtual space. We're doing a lot and it's fun. We're doing book clubs and pub theology and all sorts of things online now, and it's great.
Is there anything else anybody would like to add?
This is Angie again. I would just say that Boston Avenue has never been an insular church. We don't consider our responsibility to be to simply look inward to our members. Are they special and important to us? Absolutely. But we also recognize that as an entity that exists in the Tulsa community, we have responsibilities there. I mean, we recently completed a program where everybody donated diapers for people who needed those. Everybody donated formula for people who need to be able to feed their babies. We work with the Mental Health Association. We work with very closely in partnership with the Equality Center to make sure that LGBTQ people who desire to be part of a faith community know that they are welcome and appreciated here. I mean, the list is endless, and I tend to talk a lot anyway, but we don't just sit here ministering to each other. We minister to the entire community in whatever ways are appropriate. And I can tell you that the PPP loan has enabled us to continue doing so.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd like to say is I wish that every entity that received PPP funding, that's a nonprofit, would have this kind of conversation in some way to make available to their constituents, because hearing your stories and where you were at and what this has allowed the congregation to continue doing and all, I find it sobering and inspiring, and I think a whole lot of other people would too. So I continue to encourage those entities which receive funds, tell your folks you got them, tell your folks why you asked for them, and let them know what you're doing with them so that you can keep doing the good work you're doing. So Philip, take it away.
Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. This has been the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. Our producer is Alicia Urban. Our theme music was composed and performed by Wyatt Smith. Boston Avenue United Methodist Church is a progressive historic church located in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. Please check out our social media for more information on what's going on at Boston Avenue UMC. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you.